Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Flourish FM. Our guest today is Dr. Craig Dowden. Craig is a best-selling author, award-winning keynote speaker, and executive coach. He is celebrated for his expertise in bridging the gap between the science and practice of leadership excellence, and he spent over 25 years exploring the connections between leadership theory and application. His career spans academia, keynote speaking, and executive coaching, where he currently coaches leaders across the private, public, and non-profit sectors. He has a Ph.D. in psychology and business, and he was formerly a professor at Carleton University, where he was nominated twice for the Capital Educators Award. He's a prolific contributor to top publications such as Forbes, CEOWORLD, Psychology Today, and the Huffington Post, and he's been featured on various TV, radio, and podcast platforms. His accolades include being named in the Ottawa Business Journal Top 40 Under 40 list in 2009. He's authored 2 best-selling books, Do Good to Lead Well, The Science and Practice of Positive Leadership, and A Time to Lead, Mastering Yourself So You Can Master Your World. His podcast, Do Good to Lead Well, ranks in the top 1% globally, featuring interviews with notable thought leaders and CEOs. Nick, what did you enjoy most about our conversation with Craig?
I think Craig did a nice job of taking, leadership's a pretty common, popular topic, but I think he takes a lot of the research and the evidence and he turns them into more understandable, practical, actionable sort of items. I really liked and learned a lot about a couple new things, particularly we were just talking about it, but Marilee Adams' work around kind of a learner versus judger mindset. But I also I've always liked the phrase sort of do good to do well, and really appreciate that he's put kind of evidence behind that in terms of how people can lead. So lots of really good stuff. I learned a lot. He was a joy to talk with.
Absolutely. So this is our episode, How to Lead Well by Doing Good with Dr. Craig Dowden. Hope you enjoy it. Hey, Craig, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Awesome to be here. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have loved reading your book, your latest book, A Time to Lead, Mastering Yourself So You Can Master Your World. And let's dig right into that. I mean, the fundamental premise of that is that to successfully navigate the current and future terrain of leadership, we must be able to successfully lead ourselves. So let's start with this question. What does it mean to successfully lead yourself?
Oh, great place to start. For me, I think to successfully lead ourselves, it's when our intentions and our impacts are in alignment. When what we set out to do in terms of what we're saying or what we're doing has a maximum chance of impact, and that we feel grounded in that process. Because in the conversations that I have coaching or consulting with senior leaders, CEOs, and organizations, I find sometimes there can be a departure around that. And so the more that our intentions align with our impact, that's a good sign that we are leading ourselves successfully.
Can I ask you a super quick nuanced question there? Because I thought I heard it maybe in kind of two tweaks to the definition. So there was actions and impact, and then there was actions and the probability of impact or potential impact. And that one stood out to me because my immediate reaction is, well, do we always control impact, right? Because there's a receiver's responsibility there too. So I wonder if you maybe dig into that a little bit for us.
Thank you. I love the nuance because you're absolutely right. It's probabilities. I love one of the best ways I find conversations around talking about how to approach life and leadership. It's almost like a scientist model. We have hypotheses that we put out into the world, and then we're testing them and gathering data every single day. And I think upon reflection in situations when our intentions are not having the impact, stepping back from a place of curiosity and going, okay, what did I say? What did I do? And then how did that impact the likelihood of the probability of the outcome that I'm looking for? And I think that's so important because, as you rightly point out, Nick, you can't control how other people are going to respond and what's happening. You can control what you say and what you do. So,
sure. Yeah, good. Thanks. Yeah, we'll dig into this more, I'm sure, but it's good nuance.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So let's connect that then with the kind of skills you think a person has to build to successfully lead themselves. So many outstanding testimonials from the likes of Adam Grant and Daniel Pink and Chester Elton and so on. Daniel Pink actually is one of our forthcoming guests as well on this podcast. And Adam Grant wrote that the hardest part of leading others is often managing yourself. And Daniel Pink wrote that leadership demands self-insight and self-mastery, yet building those skills is challenging. Now, you've mentioned that kind of controlling yourself is another kind of key skill here. So we got here self-management, self-insight, self-mastery, perhaps self-control as well. What other skills are involved in successfully leading yourself, and what are some of your strategies for helping build these skills?
Well, I think, and what's interesting is around that self-mastery piece, they're kind of like two opposite sides, I would say, two complementary pieces that bring that circle together. Number one is that intentional self-reflection. So carving out space with ourselves. And there's so much fascinating data around how uncomfortable the average person is sitting with themselves quietly. I feel like that time for quiet reflection, there are so many demands on our schedules and our careers and our personal lives, just getting really focused on who we are and why we are. That's valuable to get a sense of, again, what kind of impact am I looking to have? And then secondarily, so that's the internal work. Then I also look externally in terms of gathering feedback from our environment, asking people in our personal and professional lives how we're doing, how we're showing up. Are we showing up in a way that's positive and beneficial? Are we showing up in a way that's detrimental to the particular situation or relationship? And I think that ongoing dynamic duo of self-reflection and taking time, dedicated time for that, and then proactively seeking input from the people around us that we care about most, that's the key combination. And I love how you framed it as a skill, because sometimes we think, oh, we either are born with this or we're not. And it's like any other skill in our lives, in the sports world or et cetera. It's really about going through the repetitions. So the more time we do it, the better we get and the more informed that we are. So I think that's also a critically important piece.
Okay, so it sounds like we have to form these as habits then. Self-management, self-insight, self-mastery, and so on. Let's get practical here. What's kind of an effective strategy that anyone could start implementing today to start building any of those, to form them as a regular habit? Maybe a daily practice, a weekly practice, something like that. Something that you've used with your clients, the leaders you work with, to help them build those skills.
Beautiful. I love how you frame it as a habit. Number one is to schedule time in our calendars. Have the opportunity to coach multiple CEOs, and they'll say there's always one of the CEOs I was interviewing and speaking with said, someone's always going to fill time in your calendar. So unless you take the time, dedicated time, and prioritize that, then it's very difficult because, oh yeah, this comes up, that comes up, and we lose sight of it. So intentionally setting up time in our calendars. Here's another great reflection activity that clients of mine will use is what they'll do is they'll sit back and say, okay, what are the situations and who are the people that bring out my best self and then bring out my worst self? And so you just do this exercise and you write their names down. Some people may feel a little shy or embarrassed. Oh, I don't want to write down Craig, so I'll put their initials down. And then what's really interesting is as you reflect on those situations, when you reflect on those people that either bring out your best or bring out your worst, there are going to be patterns. And you're going to see patterns in the people and situations. And now what's really interesting is now we can start to dig a little deeper back to that intentional self-reflection and say, so what is it about Craig when I interact with Craig that's prompting me to have this negative reaction? So that, and again, in my coaching practice, they'll say, oh, each time just triggers me and off I go. I'm down. I get distracted by what I'm trying to do. And I find that so valuable because then you can say, okay, so what is it about their personality, their approach, what have you? And now in advance of that conversation, and I love how you talk about building the habit, it's doing those reps is again, okay, so the next time they cut me off in the middle of a sentence, here's how I'm going to pivot back to my point. Here's how I'm going to handle when they get aggressive in that conversation. Here's what's going to happen if they shut down when I really need to engage them. So it's a really great way to get a better understanding of ourselves.
So it sounds like, and this is a good bridge, I think, into getting into these like 7 different key leadership skills or leadership areas. Because as I'm reading the list, and I'll read it off in just a second here, and listening to you, my thinking was, well, it sounds like the first step, like it is of anything in behavioral change, right, especially in the psychological world, is awareness. And what you're talking about is like so many times, so often, I should say, leaders are so overprogrammed, so busy that they're constantly in executive attention, never in default, never have time to reflect, step back, let their mind wander, right? Things like that. And so that's got to be a key, I think. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to read the list that underpins all 7 of these areas, which are mindset, emotions, or probably emotion regulation, intelligence, etc., right? Resilience, strengths, receiving feedback, having difficult conversations like you just talked about, and then authentic leadership, which I want to dive into a little bit more. But those all sound like the foundation is starting with awareness. Are we correct?
You're absolutely correct. Brilliantly said, and great insight in terms of awareness is that first step in terms of building those, and as was said, the habits, right? Like that's the critical part in terms of building those habits. And without it, now we're really in trouble. And then through that awareness, it's almost moving into that unconscious competence, right? Along that train. And that's what I think is so beautiful, is that through that awareness, okay, here are the things I need that I want to work on. Here are the things I want to replicate. And now through continuous practice, now I'm building those skills, and they become much more natural. So as an example, I was working with someone who, and it was a funny story, you asked for client examples. They scored super low on empathy and their 360 feedback. They never asked a question to anybody. So we started to work on that. So they were aware of this. Didn't come natural. And then I said, okay, well, let's go out again, like a scientist, experiment. Ask a few questions. It's like, I don't know. I know the right answer. Why do I have to do that? Great. Like, just try it. How about we have this agreement? They went out, started to ask questions. And I remember it was a hilarious conversation. They said, man, I'll never be that empathetic kind of, interested piece naturally. Yet I can see why people ask these questions. People are sharing information with me. I'm learning new perspectives. It actually broadens my thinking. I still want to tell them what to do. So once again, exactly to your point, that awareness and openness to put it into practice, critically important.
Well, it's a perfect segue, because maybe we can dive into the 7 areas a little bit. But I think you just brought us into one, which is, it sounds like that particular client had a mindset shift. Right. They had a complete reframing of what it means to actually, like, I really resonate with that, because I dislike small talk in general. Right. What I think is pointless. But what it sounded like to you was, oh, this is tactical. I'm getting feedback. I'm getting data. Right. And that's a complete mindset shift with it. Can change all sorts of behavioral patterns. So maybe you could do this, if you'd walk us through just a sentence or two of each of these areas, and then maybe we can dive into, the how-to a little bit more.
No, I think that's great. And thank you. And I'm with you. For me, it's all around the practical application, because awareness is important. That's the first step, as you just talked about. It's foundational. Sure. Then what do we do with that awareness is critical, and build the infrastructure to support that positive behavioral change. So mindset starts with the idea that essentially how we look at the world, the frame that we have, fundamentally affects the experiences that we have, the things that we say, the decisions that we make, the behaviors that we exhibit, and really draw heavily on Carol Dweck's work around growth mindset, fixed mindset, also Dr. Marilee Adams with learner mindset and judger mindset. So really getting us attuned to...
Oh, I'm not familiar with those. Will you tell me more? That's interesting. I'm not familiar. I've not heard that terminology.
Okay. So with both Carol Dweck and as well as...
No, sorry. We know Carol's stuff very well.
Okay, great.
The latter. Yeah.
Great. Yes. So Dr. Marilee Adams wrote a great book called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. It's an international bestseller. Marshall Goldsmith wrote the foreword. It's in its like 4th edition. And what she argues is that when we interact with people and situations, we're in one of 2 mindsets. We're in a judger mindset or a learner mindset. So judger is all about, hey, it's reflective of a fixed mindset, but it's all about blame. I don't want any feedback because I could be wrong. And so this is really my orientation. Learner is saying, well, what's the other person thinking, feeling, and wanting in this situation? What are pieces of information that I'm missing in this situation and what I'm doing? And so both of those are wonderfully instructive in terms of, once again, having a different outcome. From there, we move to mastering our emotions, which exactly as you said, it's really around emotional self-control. It's understanding and appreciating that our emotions are data. Let's continue down the scientific path, right? Whereby that our emotions are data points that are telling us something. Important for us to sit with them, not judge them, be curious, and understand the story that they're telling us. Then we move into resilience, which really is a subsection of, so how do we raise our ability to bounce back from challenging events? And one of the key ideas, I love this, came from the Center for Creative Leadership, where they differentiated between pressure and stress. And essentially in their work, pressure represents the extent of the demands that our external environment places on us. Stress is our internal belief about our ability to deal with those demands. And what I think is really awesome about that distinction,
that's a nice distinction. Yes,
it's beautiful because pressure is external, stress is internal. And then it explains why, let's say the three of us, if we appear basically the same, can have entirely different stress responses because Nick, you feel adequately prepared, right? And resourced. I'm struggling. I don't feel I have the resources. And I love that distinction as well, because what does it say? Well, we want to take a resource-based perspective when we are feeling stressed. What resources do I need? People around me, content, podcasts like yours to listen to now elevate the confidence that I've got this. Which brings us to chapter 4, which is mastering our strengths, which is a resource we can draw on. What are the natural talents that we possess that we can bring to the table in order to maximize our impact and our effectiveness? And there's lots of research, Gallup and elsewhere, around strengths and strengths-based leadership that really informs that conversation.
I was just going to ask real quick before you move on to receiving feedback. This is a little more about how to, but do you have a strengths taxonomy that you like to work with that you prefer over others? There's obviously half a dozen out there that seem to get a lot of use.
Yeah, I really, for me, I share the different ones with my clients and I'll say, hey, is there a particular taxonomy that, right? Because the language for them, as long as they are evidence-based and they have that foundation behind them, whatever resonates most, I find is powerful. So rather than, thank you. And I'm the same way, rather than get caught up in, okay, well, this is the model. No, what is it the way that's really going to connect with you, your organization, and what you're trying to achieve, your values. Then we move into giving and receiving into receiving feedback. And that was a very purposeful decision on my part. And I have to thank Doug Stone for this. He wrote an amazing book called Thanks for the Feedback with his colleague Sheila Heen, because so much work is done around how to give feedback. Hey, as a leader, I need to tell everybody how to get better and provide commentary in terms of their performance. And for us, and I'm going to paraphrase Barbara Fredrickson, right? One of the pioneers in positive psychology, saying that none of us can be at our best without the rest of us. It's a very rough paraphrase. And that comes with feedback. That comes from going, hey, how did I do? After our conversation today, I'll ask both of you. So what was this like? What did I do well? Where can I improve? And so what we want to do is become masterful at receiving feedback. And there was another great study that was done by Zenger Folkman that showed that 81% of the top leaders, and I think there were over 30,000 people that participated in this, I may be off on that, 81% of the top leaders were skilled, highly skilled in giving and receiving feedback, either in isolation. We want to be adept at both. And what great way to raise our game in giving feedback than modeling how to receive it. Then we move to difficult conversations, which I remember this classic, there was a Stanford study done where CEOs said this is their number one development area. So few people are excited about having a difficult conversation. Again, linking back to a great point earlier, it's skills-based. So what I wanted to do is walk everyone through, okay, this is what a difficult conversation is. Here are some of the reasons why we avoid them, and what can we do most effectively to engage with other people. And then the last one being authentic leadership. And having the privilege to collaborate with Alan Mulally, the former CEO of Ford and Boeing Commercial Airplanes, we had such a rich discussion around that. I was thrilled to have that as the closing chapter.
Thank you, Craig. So let's continue with the final of those skills or principles or areas. Authentic leadership, because that sounds fascinating, and as you say, it's a great place that you finish the book on, the final chapter. So what exactly does it mean to be an authentic leader, or to lead authentically?
Well, and I mentioned Alan, and during Alan's tenure at Ford, I mean, he took over their stock price. I think was about $1, and when he left, it was $18.26 or something like that. He was there during the crisis, the economic crisis in 2008, and they were the only major auto manufacturer that didn't need a bailout. And so during his time, and what I love when we were chatting, he shared, because so many conversations around authentic leadership, it's used so much, yet it's, to your point, what does this actually look like? And I loved his definition when we were talking. He said, authentic leadership is when your values, your beliefs, and your behaviors are in alignment. And then added, the only thing people see are your behaviors. And from there, they make assumptions about what your values and beliefs are. Yeah, I love the simplicity of that and the power of that. And once again, now, as a leader, as a community member, as a family member, I can now start to think about, well, what are my core values? And then what assumptions are people going to make when they see my behaviors, what I'm saying, what I'm doing?
How would you distinguish for folks? I have a guess where you would go with this, but values versus beliefs.
So, yeah, values versus beliefs. So beliefs are around how you think the world should work or how you think things are going to turn out. And then values are essentially what's most important to you, who you are, your legacy, the impact that you want to have on other people. And oftentimes I find those things are interchanged in conversation. And I love that because I think it's really important in terms of understanding the nuance.
Hi, friends. Nick here with just a brief interlude to share with you an update on one of our newest partnerships with the Anti-Fragile Academy. Throughout John and I's conversations with many, if not most, of our guests, one thing has been made really clear. In order for people to flourish, thrive, experience the good life, they need to develop the capacity to not only navigate and endure, but ideally grow from the bad, grow from unpleasant experiences. That's why we're thrilled to be partnering with our newest sponsor, the Anti-Fragile Academy, an organization that I co-founded with Dr. Adam Wright, Director of Mental Performance for the Washington Nationals. At the Anti-Fragile Academy, we work with adolescent athletes, executives, and educators to help them understand some of the science, not just of optimal performance, but of well-being and anti-fragility. The ability not only to endure and bounce back from unpleasantness, but to actually come back stronger, to grow from it. Between Adam and I, we've worked with Fortune 100 companies, Inc. 300 executives, Division I programs, and elite professional athletes and Olympians from all over the world. To find out more about how you can leverage anti-fragility training, check out our website at theantifragileacademy.com.
I want to connect this up with a point you made earlier, Craig, I want to return to. So earlier on, you said to kind of make a list of the 5 people that make you feel great and the 5 people that make you feel awful or not so great or bad. Now, often you'll hear recommendations. Surround yourself with the 5 people who bring out the best of you or help you best achieve your aims. And often it's also said to try and not spend so much time or maybe no time with people that don't bring out the best or even bring out the worst. I'm going to connect this up with authentic leadership in a sec, but just to go back to that, what's your recommendation once you've identified the people in your life that make you bring out the worst of you or make you feel bad? What do you do? Do you spend less time with those people, or is there a way to build time with them into your life to, for example, to build weaknesses or build strengths?
Yeah, I love this question. And to me, I feel it's important to understand those dynamics. And then from there, start to think about, okay, what is it about them that's prompting that reaction? That's still a great piece of self-insight. And in fact, I would say it's almost like the movement around emotions and emotions management, where toxic positivity, like all positivity all the time, I feel we miss a tremendous opportunity to learn and grow just because I'm spending time with someone. And even if I find their perspective frustrating or challenging, I'm learning. I'm also giving myself the opportunity to stress test the quality of my own ideas. Mm-hmm. And so that's dangerous if you're just swimming in this stream, and social media algorithms are perfect for this. There's just over and over, boy, look how right I am. And what I think is so incredibly powerful is to step back and say, now, what is it about my beliefs that may be off here? What are some ways in which I want to build nuance? And so I think all of those things are valuable. Now, what's important as well is there a difference between their emotional impact versus, okay, are they different in terms of just their personality or their communication style? Because there's also data that shows from an emotional contagion standpoint that as human beings, emotions are contagious. So if you spend a lot of time with someone that's very negative, very critical, that can and likely will have an impact. And so what I love from and from the evidence as well is to start to think about, okay, how do I go find a restorative niche, if you will? How do I refill my emotional gas tank if I've been exposed? Because in some cases, we may not have choice around how often or how much time we spend with certain people who we can find really, really challenging emotionally. And I think the other interesting thing, just to kind of go a related off ramp, is around how what's fascinating is, and Adam Grant has talked about this, and you mentioned him at the beginning, the power of disagreeable givers. And I think sometimes in our lives, when people are naturally a bit, let's call ornery or disagreeable in orientation, we might not think that they're caring or supportive or will help us out. They can actually provide a lot of value there. And so I think, once again, really just being mindful of who we're interacting with, how and why, it's very valuable. I would not say to just streamline and only have one group to be around.
Yeah. So then to connect that with leadership then. So let's imagine the leaders trying to create the optimal team, both for themselves, performing at their best as a leader, but also for the team, all performing the best themselves. How would you kind of roughly build that team in terms of the kind of emotions each team member brings out of one another and brings out of the leader? Let's say 60% positive, 40% negative, if we could quantify it that way. How might you go about doing that and like analyzing that over time and building the best team over time?
Yeah, it's a fascinating way to frame the question around. What I would say is that it's almost, it's focusing on the positive. So you want to create positive team dynamics. So mostly oriented towards the positive. Let's say it's 70, 80%. Yet at the same time, you don't want to lose the critics, the skeptics within that, because that can be a really powerful anchoring mechanism. The supremely optimistic may want to fly to the moon. And then those that are more pessimistic is like, hey, so let's just kind of take a breath and see what's the plan to get there. Both of them are immensely valuable. Now, to me, the critical part, though, is it's irregardless of like kind of the emotional makeup is how do we express those emotions, right? How do we engage? So if it's personal attacks, I'm sick and tired of you being so pessimistic and bringing us down, like you've got to dream bigger. Well, now I'm having a personal attack. Versus saying, hey, like we are trying to ideate different options for how we can move. So I find that constant bringing us back, that's more challenging. Now we're having a robust conversation. It's not telling someone to not be who they are and show up in an authentic way. What it's doing is calibrating how we're going to be able to connect. I also had the privilege of speaking with James White and Krista White, the father-daughter duo that wrote the book Anti-Racist Leadership through Harvard Business Review Press. And what was interesting about his conversation around building teams was that a lot of times people and senior leaders talk about fit within the culture, fit within the team. And his argument was what we want to do is look for cultural enhancement. How is it the people that we're bringing into our teams or organizations actually enhance us? and allow us in a more expansive way to have the impacts that we're looking for.
That's how I think of fit.
Yeah.
Maybe it's semantics, but that's how I would define goodness of fit in the literature, right? It's not about necessarily matching that everybody's the same. It's about complementary skills, right? Background diversity, job diversity are some of the terms that come to mind. But
couldn't agree more. Yeah, absolutely. I think bang on.
Okay, so let's move on to another notion. You talk about in a time to lead, how to master the inner game of leadership. Okay.
Yeah.
So this notion of the inner game, it's quite popular, for example, in the work of Timothy Galway, famous book, The Inner Game of Tennis, The Inner Game of Golf, The Inner Game of Work, and so on. And, really important in really important in performance coaching. So what key factors are involved in the inner game of leadership as we contrast it with these other kind of inner games, the inner game of, say, some sport or some other professional role?
Yeah, I think, and I love this question, in terms of, I would say there's a lot of, if we use Venn diagrams, I'd say there's a lot of overlap on the inner game of X, Y, or Z. Now, I think for leaders, where that piece is that as a leader, and as a positive leader in particular, where you're looking to mobilize a group of individuals essentially and align behind a common mission to go achieve extraordinary things. Well, now the addition to that diagram is around, so how do I get the best out of the people around me? And thinking about myself. So within this environment, how do I need to show up? Who do I need to be? What are the key drivers that I'm bringing to that conversation? And I feel like as a leader of people in organizations, in communities, that's the extra element within it, or a more developed area of focus when it comes to that inner game.
This must be really difficult to train and teach people in, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. How do you, what's some of the most effective strategies you've developed in your work as to how you train or teach, or both, someone to build their inner game?
Well, I think we talked about one of them around identifying the situations, identifying people. I'll provide another example on the opposite end. I think it's around, because that's that internal self-reflection, self-focus, gathering feedback. I think it's an inexpensive tool. You can do it every single day in every single conversation if you wish, just very quickly in 60 seconds. Hey, I'd love to get some feedback on this. And yet so few of us do this. And I think for a couple of ways, being proactive. So some real great tips from the research and the practice around feedback. Asking people for feedback and explaining why. What I find, particularly in leadership and particularly in coaching, sometimes people will ask for feedback, and then there's just this vacuum around the why. So then, and it can even be a family member or a friend. And if I haven't asked for feedback before, can be, whoa, what is Craig asking me for this? And is he going to bring the sledgehammer out when I come out and, oh, it sounds soft, the water is warm, and then boom, right? The other piece that I think is incredibly valuable is also let people know how you want to receive feedback. Because even when you ask for feedback, in my experience, someone can be, so let's say, hey, you want to give me feedback on things. And let's say you trust that I'm sincerely interested. Well, we've got that relationship happening. So then I don't want to say it in the wrong way. I don't want to deliver it. And so now it's going to compromise this. So now by letting people know, hey, here's how I want to receive it. So some people are like, just don't sugarcoat it. Hit me right between the eyes with it. Don't wait. Just get right to it. As you were saying earlier, no small talk. Let's just go. Let's get into it. Others will say, I need some warming up. I need to have a bit of an appetizer and some conversation. All of those approaches are absolutely fine. And now what you're doing is saying, I want feedback. Here's why I want it. And you are an invaluable person to give it to me. I value your perspective because I'm going to have blind spots. I need you to fill them in for me because I want to have a positive impact in our relationship, in our work environment. And then this is the best way you can service me in accomplishing that goal. How does that sound? And in the vast majority of cases, then people are going, Awesome. Thank you. And now we're getting that input so that if I'm not showing up in the way that I want, if I'm not having the impact that I've told other people I want to have, now I maximize the chances, again, back to probability, someone's going to raise their hand. Or on top of that, me continuing to be proactive and ask for feedback.
Are there some boundaries or some tensions around how many people a leader can feasibly do this with? Because I'm sitting here listening to that all makes sense, and I have a background in education, so I'm thinking, oh, it sounds like differentiation, right? Like you got to deal with the person in front of you, and I think it's probably pretty clear that at this moment in time, right, in world history, we're dealing with as much variety and individuality as we've ever seen, right? And in school settings, that can be overwhelming because it's just so many different people and so many different types of protocols. So what's that balance look like in leadership in your mind, whether it's authentic leadership or we'll get into positive leadership and trying to meet the person in front of you without burning yourself out, becoming that selfless giver instead of that otherish giver, right?
Absolutely. And I think from a feedback perspective, and I love the framing earlier around it being a habit. Every conversation we can take 30 seconds, a minute afterwards. Let's say we have a team meeting. I can go to the team and say, hey, what was the best thing about the meeting? What was the most challenging thing about the meeting? What's one thing that we can improve in the future? And another piece is just because we receive feedback with someone, it doesn't mean we have to agree with it or action it. What it does do now, though, is empower us to understand, oh, if I keep doing this in the future, this is the reaction I'm going to get. Because also in my work, sometimes people just get increasingly frustrated. Craig's always doing this. And now by getting that feedback, now I have the choice around what I want to do with it. And the more aware I am of what's happening or how I'm impacting others, now I can make more intentional choices. And so I think really just in almost every conversation, we can look for ways to infuse that in, especially if they are critical conversations, right? Like we just had a team meeting, or there's an onboarding with a new employee, or we're in a community group and community association. We're looking to launch a particular initiative. We can ask, hey, grab a couple of people on the way out. How did I show up? Any thoughts or any suggestions about how I can contribute more effectively the next time? It lowers the risk factor, if you will, and also the intensity of that, just making it a common way of how we interact.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
So on the breadth of this feedback, Craig, I want to dig into this because you write in A Time to Lead that the best leaders possess an advanced understanding of the inner workings of their minds and their hearts. So I take it, if for feedback to help advance that kind of understanding of your heart, let's say, this is feedback not just maybe in the professional sphere, but also in someone's personal life about how maybe they conducted themselves emotionally in a personal relationship, in an argument with a family member, for example. So are you recommending, if we take this, maybe this goes beyond the scope of your work, tell me if it does, but seeking feedback, what kind of forms would that take if we want to develop an advanced understanding of our hearts?
Yeah, I think, and I love the question because I think our hearts are everywhere as well. You get the expression kind of, it's not personal, it's business, and that we bring our hearts to every conversation, to every interaction that we have in our careers and in our home lives. And I think from a heart standpoint, so one point I would make as well, this is kind of a continuum to me as well. It's not, sometimes there's this dichotomy. Again, we're very skilled as human beings of doing either or in this. It's really a continuum. And then in certain situations, we want to lead more with the heart. In certain situations, we want to lead more with our heads, with our minds. And then the skill in that is learning, okay, what are the demands of the situation? What's happening here? And then where am I going to lean more heavily in this particular situation? We want both operating. If we're looking at developing more insight into our hearts and the emotions, well, now this is the same way. If it's a difficult conversation, let's say with your romantic partner, maybe it's a child, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a direct report, you can ask the direct question, hey, thank you for the conversation, really important. And even if it was a really tough one, I appreciate what we talked through. I just want to check in, like, how did I show up for you on this? Like how did you engage with me? What were your thoughts? How was the quality of our interaction? Excellent. And then they may say, well, I found you interrupted me and I felt like at times you weren't hearing me, et cetera, et cetera. Great. This is all really valuable information that a lot of times we want to avoid or we don't check in on, even though the opportunities are right there. And it's incredibly powerful.
Okay. So I want to move from authentic leadership, Craig, to something else you dub, or another notion you dub, positive leadership. Well, I'm not sure. Did you coin this notion, Craig?
No, I think I would not. It's been used a fair amount. I mean, positive psychology and then positive leadership from there. So there isn't a copyright with Craig Dowden on it. So
okay. Well, if not coined, then a notion that you have advanced important work on, right? So this is now going from your book, your most recent book, A Time to Lead, your first book, Do Good to Lead Well. And in that, you emphasize the importance of positive leadership. So what exactly is positive leadership, and what are some of its core principles?
Well, I think, and they're very similar to the themes that we're talking about here today. And positive leadership is really around focusing on generating positive results through a focus on positive emotions and creating a positive work environment, an inclusive work environment, a collaborative work environment. Now, one thing that's vitally important within that, notice it's focus on. It doesn't mean it's solely. Once again, disagreement is incredibly powerful. Constructive disagreement is essential to learn. And so it's just where do we put our focus? I had the pleasure of speaking with Kim Cameron, the founder of the co-founder of the Center for Positive Organizations, University of Michigan, and talked about the heliotropic effect. People are, again, attracted to positive energy, repelled by negative energy. And positive energy is life-giving. Negative energy is energy and life depleting. And I think as a positive leader, that is your orientation. How do I build an environment where people are going to feel engaged? They're going to feel understood. So one of the key skills within that, or qualities, empathy or compassion as an example, feeling that someone cares about them and understands them, where they are, who they are, why they are. It doesn't mean they get everything they want. Back to the point earlier about just being a selfless giver. As leaders, as executives, as business owners, we have to make choices, yet by being aware of and consolidating all of these different pieces of information, it's incredibly valuable. So that's how I see positive leadership.
Kim Cameron has some of my favorite terminology for employees, leaders in the workplace, and you just described it, but I think he calls them plumbers and electricians, right? Do you energize or do you drain? But I really like the piece you're adding here, which that is not necessarily connected to affectively how it feels. You might be energized by something unpleasant, right? You might be drained by something pleasant, but it's really about energizing and getting that energy going in consistent and aligned directions, right?
Exactly. And that's the critical part. Is I love how you're highlighting the importance of consistency. That's key. And then to the point made earlier by John around the habits, right? Consistency builds habits. And then there's also just that alignment. And that is so vitally important, especially the speed with which the world is operating these days and all the different changes that are upon us. The importance of being aligned, so powerful, because if we know, okay, this is direction we're rowing together, awesome. If we start branching off and going in different spaces, well, now there's going to be a challenge, because then having to reconsolidate and then go, all right, where are we going now? So I love that dynamic duo that you're pointing out.
You think this particular time, this particular context is, positive leadership and authentic leadership are more necessary than others? I know it's a hard question to answer, but do you see particular stressors or pressures kind of in the modern world that make it more critical or even more challenging? Maybe both.
I think you're absolutely right. I think of both. It's more challenging today than ever before to be positive because you see the high levels of anxiety. You see, in surveys, I'm in Canada, as you know, I think it's 70% of Canadians feel the country is broken, right? There's divisiveness that's out there, social media, you see all of these things happening. And so that makes it really challenging. On the flip side of that, as you said, it's never more important than right now. People are crying out for positive leadership, people coming in, being authentic, charting a course, having their behaviors align with their values, where trust has cratered. So this is kind of that juxtaposition that you're talking about, which is it's challenging, yet it's never been more important. The opportunity has never been greater, and the need has never been greater, and the ability to impact has never been greater as well. So I feel like it is a place or a time whose time has come, really.
Yeah.
So, Craig, you may know from listening to our podcast, we have a signature question we finish all of our episodes with. What is one lesson on flourishing you'd like our listeners to walk away with? And what is a practical step for putting that lesson into action?
Maybe leadership for flourishing. For flourishing. And besides awareness, because I think you already dropped that gem on us, the reflection piece, right? Yeah, if I can just add.
So yeah, what is one lesson on leadership for flourishing?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And thank you. This has been an awesome conversation. The time has flown by. I can't believe we're at the end of this.
We've enjoyed it
already. It's been great. So to me, the key critical part, and we've hinted on this a little bit, is around values. And I'm gonna expand on that with a practice. Because when you talk about flourishing, and I love the focus of your podcast, well, what's flourishing? When we feel in alignment with our values. I'm so thrilled, Nick, that you mentioned that right around the values piece. So when we feel we're living and leading in alignment with our values, we're flourishing. So how do we do that? I love this exercise. Basically, first step, and we talked about awareness, what are our core values? List them out, 3, 5, whatever they are, in leadership and in life. And at the end of every day, take some time and basically do a scorecard, do a KPI. To what extent did I live and lead with my values today? And reflect on the behaviors on a scale of 0 to 10. Now, if I've done a 10, awesome, excited about tomorrow. If I'm a 2, guess what I do tomorrow? Let's say family is a value, right? I want to make sure, maximize time with family, my children. If I scored myself a 2, guess what's the first thing I'm going to do as soon as I can that next day? I'm going to spend time with my daughter. I'm going to spend time with my partner, and now be able to realign. And I think that's such a simple yet incredibly powerful and meaningful activity we can do to flourish.
Measure what matters, and values are a huge deal in a lot of these things, right? So here's a quick follow-up, because I find this a lot with clients we work with, and it's part of why I asked you to distinguish between values and beliefs. Values feels abstract for a lot of people. You have a tool, you have an exercise, a survey. Like, some people hear that and they're like, oh, I know my values, and they got them locked in, and that's just how they exist. Other people are like, I don't know what that means. I have no clue. How do they get started to even become aware of the values and then measure them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and there are different tools you can do, Google searches for values, and you're absolutely right. And so now you can start that journey, because some people have never thought about it. Some people think they already know. And then when they sit with that for a little longer, they go, oh yeah, I'm not really that sure. Or, boy, these almost seem like they are competing in some ways, or depending on the day that I wake up or what's going on, I might have a different set of priorities. So I think just carving out that time to do it, I think is absolutely important.
Great. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Craig Dowden. Where can our listeners and our viewers find out more about your awesome work?
They can go to the website, craigdowden.com. They can connect with me on LinkedIn and tell me that the Flourishing podcast sent them. I love this has been a joy. So it'll be extra special to connect. And then also my podcast, Do Good to Lead Well, which is on Spotify and Apple and all the other streaming platforms.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Craig. It's been a fascinating and fun conversation. We've loved it.
And learned a lot.
Feelings mutual. Loved your questions.
Thanks so much for listening to Flourish FM. We hope you enjoyed the content. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast and on all major social media platforms.
And if you visit our website, flourishfmpodcast.com, you can sign up to our newsletter. We send out a weekly newsletter. First newsletter of every month, we share a long-form blog, and every newsletter, every week, we share highlights from our previous episodes. Please hit subscribe on our website.